guys! Today I want to talk with you about Eenie Meenie by M.J. Arledge. This crime thriller was first published in 2014 and it is the first novel telling us the story of a homicide detective named Helen Grace. As per usual, we will start this video with a short synopsis, then proceed to the non-spoiler review and wrap this video up with the spoilers. If you haven't read this book yet, but you're looking to pick up a great crime thriller series, then do not worry. I will make sure to let you know when the spoilers begin. So Eenie Meenie tells us one story from two different sides. On one side, we get to follow a multitude of random people who end up in a very messy situation. There is a serial killer on the loose, and said killer enjoys playing games. One game in particular, actually. The killer abducts two people and leaves them in a space the victims are unable to escape from. No food, no water, just a gun and instructions. If one of the victims will kill the other, that person will get to walk away alive. On the other side of the story, we get to follow Helen Grace, the detective responsible for catching said psychopath. And while Helen is not a newbie at her job, even she has not encountered such twisted evil yet. And what scares her the most is that the more information Helen uncovers, the more terrifying the truth ends up being. Sam is asleep. I could kill him now. Now that's how you start a thriller. This quote is literally the very first sentence of the very first book in the Helen Grace series, and it got me hooked instantly. I'm not even joking here. I was visiting my favorite secondhand bookstore, I noticed Eenie Meenie, I opened the book to skim through the first page, and the next thing I knew I was buying all the books in the series that were available at the time. For many years now I have been an avid reader of crime thrillers, and once I was done reading every single book released by the one and only Tess Gerritsen, I have looked for another crime series that would draw me in as much as the Rizzoli and Isles series did. Unsuccessfully, I may add. That was until I encountered Mr. M.J. Arledge. I had such big hopes for these books that, if I'm being honest, after I started reading Eenie Meenie, for the longest time I could not understand why I'm not enjoying this book to the extent I expected to enjoy it. I mean, this book had everything that I live for in crime thrillers. It had gruesome series of crimes, fast-paced, multiple POVs, a mysterious and relentless killer, and then it hit me. It's not the book that I have an issue with, it's Helen Grace. I just really don't like Helen Grace. I mean, I do understand that this book is only a first in a book series about Helen, and she's supposed to be a flawed character who evolves with the story, but as of now, as of Eenie Meenie, for me Helen felt more like a tough policewoman stereotype than an actual person. Even though we get a glimpse of her past and internal issues, when it comes to her behavior, she's just tough as a man, no bullshit, no private life, and seemingly no human emotions allowed cliché. And in addition to that, she is judgmental and exceptionally rude. However, once I made my peace with the fact that the main character of the book kinda sucks, this book became an entertaining and enjoyable read. If you're a fan of crime thrillers, I could not recommend you this book enough. It really immerses you in the story, and it shows so much potential for the future books. That being said, there's one thing that you should keep in mind before you decide to read Eenie Meenie. This book is disgusting. And I'm not joking here. I can't even come up with any other book that I have read that would have been just as disgusting as this one, so I will have to use movies in order to illustrate my point. So just do me a favor and try to imagine the nastiness you see on the screen while watching such movies as Saw or Human Centipede. Now imagine the gruesome scenes you see in those movies described in a book in incredible detail. So if you decide to read this book, which once again I think you definitely should, then do yourself a favor and at least avoid snacking while reading it. That being said, let's move to the spoiler review so we could talk a little bit more freely about the big mysteries of this novel. If you haven't read Eenie Meenie yet, now it's the perfect time for you to click off this video. So let's start this spoiler review by talking a little bit about Mariana. Now, I'm well aware that I just read a whole book of her torturing, starving, abusing, and essentially killing people just to prove a point to her sister with whom she has had no interaction for the last 25 years, but I still can't help but feel bad for her. And I know, trust me, I know how my defense of someone this evil will come across, but I do honestly believe that Mariana is also a victim in this story. Just look at her upbringing. All her childhood, she was emotionally, physically, and eventually sexually abused. She grew up in a toxic environment where both of her parents constantly neglected her, where they were constantly under the influence of alcohol and possibly drugs, where she was night after night surrounded by strangers, and in addition to that, she had to observe the never-ending humiliation and physical abuse of her mother at the hands of her father. She was only 13 when not only her own father brutally raped her, but the very same night he facilitated the rape of Mariana to his friends. This constant abuse shaped the way Mariana saw life and human interactions. This excessive trauma without a doubt messed with her psyche. In addition to that, killing her own parents, even though I would argue that the wish to make her abusers pay is understandable as well, was the line that Mariana was not really capable of coming back from. In her twisted way, Mariana felt that by doing what she did, she was protecting her sister the way she herself wanted her mother to protect them both. Mariana tells us in one of her chapters that she was depressed and she was getting desensitized to the abused, and she didn't have it in her to fight anymore. And the only reason she decided to kill their parents was because she knew that the father is not going to stop with her, that he will be coming for Helen too. And whether that is actually true or whether that was just the thing she needed to believe in order to commit these murders, I think that Mariana felt that she was acting in Helen's best interests. Overall, these chapters of Mariana reminiscing about her abuse were bone-chilling to read. And her life didn't get any better after she got free of her family. We don't know much about what happened to her afterwards, but we do know that she spent all these years in prison, where she was also subjected to mental and physical abuse. And to be honest, I would not be surprised at all if she was also an instigator of abuse of others, because the life of violence is all that Mariana knows. In this book, Mariana's chapters were few and far between, but every time I got to see what she went through, I forgot that she's the one doing the killing now. All I could think about was that the world failed her too. In a weird way, I can find a reason to justify Mariana's anger with her sister as well. Mariana took the worst from their family, and she believed that she's doing everything in order to protect Helen, and I see how she would perceive Helen calling the police as a betrayal. Mariana took it upon herself to be her little sister's defender, a shield between their parents and her, and yet once Mariana ended up in prison, Helen turned her back on their lives together. Which, to be honest, is understandable as well. Helen's way to cope with the trauma was to try and erase her past completely. By erasing her past, however, she also completely erased the fact that she has a sister who desperately needed her help. One of the last things Mariana said to Helen after Helen offered her help in the end was, "You had your chance, Jody, and you washed your hands of me. You saved all those people, all those strangers, but you washed your hands of me." And that one quote contained so much power and so much hurt that to an extent I'm upset that Mariana was killed in the end of Eeny Meeny, as I would have loved to see their personal stories as well as their dynamic to be explored further. That being said, none of this means that I justify Mariana's behavior. It means that I understand better her motivations for said behavior. In the end of the day, she's just another person who was failed by the system. She is a mentally ill person who needed to be put in a psychiatric facility after she killed her parents and given help, rather than being put in prison. Now, however, after such gruesome crimes she committed against innocent people, we could argue that Mariana is beyond saving. And just the same way that Mariana felt that she had no other choice but to kill their parents, as they were monsters, Helen felt that she had to kill Mariana because she was one too. Before we wrap up, I just want to point out that this book contained some of the nastiest, nightmare-inducing scenes I have ever read in a novel. The chapter 102, where Mark eats maggots from his own head, will unfortunately live in my head rent-free for the rest of my life. I have no doubt about it. Just thinking about it makes me feel nauseous. Eenie Meenie, however, is obviously not without its flaws. As I have mentioned in my non-spoiler review, I found Helen to be a very unlikable character, especially in the way she treats those around her. Her affair with Mark was wrong on so many levels, and her demeaning attitude towards Jake was painful to read about. And just a side note, I do honestly hope that as the story progresses, we will get to know more about Jake, as he seems like a fascinating character to me. In addition to that, the novel contains some small continuity errors, as well as it was so much action and information packed that at times it felt like the author bit a little more than he can chew, and the investigative side of this crime novel was barely existent. That being said, this is a debut novel of M.J. Arledge, as well as this is the first book in the Helen Gray series, which makes me less inclined to be judgmental towards the things I have just mentioned a moment ago. Overall, I do feel that this book is a great starting point with a lot of potential to grow into a strong and captivating crime thriller series. But that's just my opinion. What about yours?